not just certain aspects or certain buildings. So if, for example, a court date is in a building that is very old prior to the ADA is held in that facility, then an individual with access needs can access that building. They would have to move that court date to another building that is accessible. That being said, all new building constructions and alterations need to be brought up to code and make sure that individuals with disabilities can access them. If you are here in Chicago, the new Green Line stop over on Damon was built with accessibility in mind, so it is fully accessible for individuals with disabilities, including so all new trains, all new buses that are procured as well. They have to be accessible. Now, as I mentioned, not all platforms are accessible. The train may be a little bit uneven in certain platforms from the train and the platform itself. And in that case, the ADA also requires individuals to provide reasonable modifications and, um, adaptation. So that would be, you could ask the train or the train attendee to provide a ramp to enter the train if you are a wheelchair user, and they'll communicate that to the station where you are leaving or exiting, and they'll have someone else that also will have a ramp available, including in which cart you are in. So they kind of communicate that. So that is a form of a reasonable modification policy to allow individuals to travel by train. And then, of course, one of the biggest items that we do get questions on is ride share. So, Lyfts, Ubers, those are services that are being provided to the public and have to be accessible. So they have to allow for extra time for individuals with disability to utilize said services, allow for service animals to get into those vehicles as well, because they are covered entities under Title III of the ADA. Taxis have been here for us for a long period of time. Those are also have to be accessible. And of course, because a lot of as we move forward, when you're requesting said rides, you're using, applications on your phone. So by extension, if a organization is providing services online, those kind of services also have to be accessible, such as is it legible or can screen readers use it? Individuals that are blind or have visual or audio communications or verbal communications, can they also access these services? And of course, there's the weather. We're in the Midwest. So one of the biggest items that individuals do have is, being able to move around through the city. So of course, paratransit is available for individuals that meet the eligibility requirements. And of course, we can discuss that as we move further into this conversation. I don't want to spend all the time on this.
Great, thank you. Jacqueline, anything that you want to add to that?
Absolutely. So thank you so much for talking a lot about the ADA, Oscar. It's a nice introduction for some of the findings that I've discovered in my research. I primarily do research here in Chicago on fixed route transportation, but I'm also very active in the disability community and know quite a bit about paratransit. So, as far as some of the biggest transportation challenges faced by seniors in Illinois, we see some accessibility gaps. We know that the ADA mandates features like ramps, elevators, stop announcements, but research shows that sometimes these are inconsistent or poorly maintained. And so that creates some uncertainty and barriers for older adults with mobility or sensory impairments. I think going along with that, folks have safety concerns, and they're varied here in Illinois. So we have things like fear of crime, being a victim of crime, being an easy victim of crime, falls or collisions, slips, and especially on buses and platforms, is really heightened for seniors, especially those with disabilities. I'm going to go through two more things that I think are less related to the physical environment. One is travel burden, and I see travel burden across fixed route, but also in paratransit. So when we talk about that, folks have long wait times. They're subject to unreliable transportation schedules, and the complexity of transfers between bus and train, bus and bus, bus and metro can really make trips exhausting and discourage participation in community activities. And the final one that I'll highlight, which I think is getting more and more attention, is the social stigma that people, seniors and people with disabilities, face while riding transportation. People talk about how they face negative attitudes, whether it's explicit, where they're getting in arguments with people over the accessible seating areas, or more along the lines of those microaggressions of like, oh, that person needed the ramp to enter the bus, and the bus collectively kind of groans, right, when their trip is delayed. So I think conversations also with operators is another area that really can cause some stress. And I think all of these relate to people's avoidance of travel, or decrease in use of travel. I do also want to just mention that the door-to-door or paratransit challenges are a little bit unique, and um, there's a myriad of challenges that result from using paratransit. It's definitely less spontaneous and can limit autonomy for seniors and people with disabilities. But I think a lot of the challenges that I had mentioned are frequently also present on paratransit.
Thank you both for answering that question. I do have one more question for the two of you, but before I ask that, apologies to the audience. If you have any questions that are coming up for you while our panelists are speaking, you can type them into the chat, or you can raise your hand and we will call upon you. We want this to function as a conversation, so you don't have to wait until the end to ask your questions. All right, and as you know, you're thinking of questions to ask, I'm going to go ahead with the other question that I had for Jacqueline and Oscar. So, some of what you've said so far about transportation challenges faced by seniors and people with disabilities are in the Chicagoland area. Um, in your experience, have you come across distinct transportation challenges faced by rural and suburban dwelling seniors and people with disabilities in the state?
Yeah, this is Oscar here. I'll go ahead and start that conversation. So yes, I also lived in a rural area. So right now, living in a city, you're probably gonna wait, as Jacqueline mentioned, a time burden. So you're waiting 30 minutes out in the cold and the warm for a bus here in Chicago. But then you go into the rural areas and you're waiting an hour, 30 minutes, 40 minutes for the transportation. And so paratransit services are also available whenever there's a fixed route. So here, there's plenty of fixed routes that make paratransit available. Now, if a state or, I'm sorry, if the county, the city doesn't offer any fixed route services, then paratransit may not even be an option. And therefore, individuals may have to rely on other forms of transportation. One of the things about the ADA and paratransit is that the language says origin to destination. So that, of course, can be door to door or curb to curb. But it doesn't. But if a paratransit services is providing curb to curb, doesn't mean that that's the only service they provide. They have to be able to modify their policy if an individual requires additional services besides the curb to curb. Um, and then, if you're transferring from one county to another, if you live nearby county lines, you have to coordinate with different paratransit services if that's an option, or, or coordinate with a taxi service or a rideshare if paratransit is not available in the other county and you're going to visit family or going to a health care appointment. And one of the biggest thing, of course, is that for paratransit, you have to make the reservation in advance. So individuals kind of have to plan their time, and they're given an hour of a window of when there might be. So there's like a plus or minus 15 to 30 minutes of when they will pick you up. So the time frame is really, you're at the whim of traffic, other stops that may come in, or complications of the vehicle itself. So there's plenty of factors that come into planning your day out when you're using paratransit services, especially in rural areas.
Yeah, thanks, Oscar. I think just to add a couple of things, um, I have seen some of that limited service frequency and coverage really impact individuals the fewer routes, kind of longer distances can amplify isolation. I think that oftentimes there's disconnect between services. So what we might describe as service coordination can sometimes be a challenge or a greater challenge when you're looking at suburban and rural areas. I think we also see infrastructure gaps amplified in rural areas and suburban areas where there's, limited sidewalks, limited curb cuts, safe crossings may make access to transit stops difficult. And I think that more globally, in our suburban and rural areas, there is a much higher reliance on personal vehicles, which may increase the burden of either relying on others for rides or subject somebody who may have a fixed income or already living with limited means to have to invest in maintaining and keeping a personal vehicle because you're otherwise isolated without. And so I think that's just an additional consideration.
Thank you both. Yeah, Jacqueline, you mentioned relying on others to give them rides. On the National Aging and Disability Transportation Center website, there are some statistics about that. And it seems like 78% of seniors who are aging in place have to rely on caregivers, friends, or neighbors for rides, even for necessary medical appointments. So that is definitely an important issue.
I just want to
Melissa,
chime in one more quick thing about that.
yeah,
I'm an
yeah,
occupational therapist by
yeah.
background. And so, in my experience working as an OT, those folks that are aging in place are working really hard to age in place. And so there is a certain emotional and I think identity piece when you sort of retire from driving and rely on others. So that's really a life transition that is really underappreciated in our healthcare systems and in our communities.
Great. Melissa, do you want to add to this conversation?
Yeah, just really quickly, thanks Oscar and Jacqueline for really talking about those challenges. I guess I wanted to, shed a little light in terms of hopeful solutions for folks in rural areas, which I'm sure both of you are aware of. When there is no fixed route available or very limited, often older adults are depending on volunteer driver programs, which if they are in existence, that's definitely an option for folks to look to, or other on-demand programs that may be available. They're fewer and far between in rural areas, but we've seen some areas that are ramping up in that in that arena. And then for suburban, of course, we know suburbans are suburb areas. They were designed for cars. They're car centric, and so you don't see a lot of public transit out there. So Oscar mentioned TNCs and looking at those types of options for folks in the suburb areas, or even other volunteer networks could be helpful in those suburb areas as well. So I just wanted to add that. Yeah.
Thanks, Melissa. My next set of questions was actually for you, Melissa.
Okay.
So, yeah, don't turn off your mic just yet. Um, what are some national trends related to accessible and affordable transportation, and how do these affect the aging population?
Sure. I think one important national trend that we've been seeing is this push to connect affordable transportation with housing, or transportation with affordable housing. So we're seeing this in cities like Seattle or Toronto, Albuquerque, and even statewide in California, where I think recently there was an initiative linking housing and transit access. But we know that this approach doesn't just benefit commuters. It's essential for older adults who want to age in place and stay connected in their communities. We're also seeing this investment in mobility hubs. So like in places like West Hartford, Connecticut, or Denver, where multiple transportation options can come together, making it easier for older adults and people with disabilities to get around in their communities. And at the same time, cities like Baltimore are upgrading sidewalks, curb ramps. Both Oscar and Jacqueline mentioned, that just to meet the ADA public right-of-way standards. And these are critical for safe and independent travel. Unfortunately, we all know that funding cuts continue to, kind of impede this progress. Recently, I just kind of read an article was happening in Plano, Texas, when the DART system, they considered reducing services. More than 100 residents came out to voice their concerns about how those cuts are going to affect their accessibility and their ability to get around in their community. So I think this just shows how vital reliable transportation is to community living. And then finally, I would be remiss if I did not bring up automated vehicles, AVs, even though this could be a transformative effort for people who are no longer driving or can't drive. There's still a long way to go before this widespread adoption that, folks are hoping to see. But we are seeing early pilots. There's one in Grand Rapids, Minnesota, their Go Marty program, and they're showing promise. Federal agencies are beginning to explore regulations to ensure technology evolves in an inclusive way. And then my last remarks, I want to kind of go back to the connection of housing and transportation. And so when we're talking about this, it's equally important to ensure that outreach and service design reflect the linguistic and cultural diversity of our older adult communities. So I want to make sure I frame that just for the audience today. So for example, places like Seattle and Los Angeles, where many older residents speak limited English, multilingual signage, bilingual travel training, partnerships with AAPI community organizations are key to ensure that those transportation investments are truly accessible for those communities.
Thank you so much for bringing that up, Melissa, because our technical assistance and resource center primarily focuses on Asian American and Pacific Islander older adults, and language difficulties are a common barrier across the board for this population. So it's good to know that there are examples out there of bilingual transportation training and multilingual signage. So thank you for sharing
Absolutely.
that. I do have one follow-up question for you. You mentioned mobility hubs. Could you say a little bit more about what that is?
Yeah, so mobility hubs are, I guess, mobility-centric areas where you may see ability to rent or use a bike or a scooter. You've got public transit nearby. There may be paratransit that can pick up in that area. Just a place where folks are really looking at designing these centric hubs so it's easy to navigate. So you hear a lot about first mile, last mile issues and getting to a transit stopper or somewhere else. These mobility hubs are trying to, focus these areas so that it's almost like a one-stop shop, for your mobility needs. So that's pretty much what they are.
Great. Thank you.
Mhm.
Another question for you, Melissa. What federal funding mechanisms and technical resources are available for local communities to meet the transportation needs of seniors?
Sure. I think when it comes to federal funding, the core programs that most communities are relying on now, you see FTA sections 5310, section 5311, the Older Americans Act, Titles 3B, I think Oscar mentioned that, also Title 6 in tribal transportation, and then also non-emergency medical transportation, or NEMT, some folks go by that. Those I feel really form the backbone of accessible mobility for older adults and people with disabilities. But there are some kind of lesser known opportunities from the federal standpoint. There's a federal funds spreading guide on the CCAM TAC website, and CCAM means the Coordinating Council on Access and Mobility. They now have a technical assistance center, and you can go to their website and look at this federal funds spreading guide. And what I like about it is that it lists more than about 100 federal programs that include some form of transportation support. So just to give a sense of scope, so HHS has about 66 programs, DOT and HUD about 12, the VA maybe around 3, and the USDA even has 2 programs. Not all of these programs serve older adults directly, but they can often be combined with or coordinated to expand local services if you want to combine looking for money for match dollars, things like that. In terms of technical resources, communities can also turn to technical assistance centers like yours or CCAM TAC. There's another TA center that US Agent is a part of. That's the Accessible Transportation Resource Center. National RTAP also, that's the National Rural Transportation Access Program, and the Shared Use Mobility Center. These are just a few technical assistance programs which can provide toolkits, peer learning, and help really local leaders build capacity. And I do want to add this caveat because this is a question sometimes I get when either we present or are speaking with someone, just to make sure that folks on the line know what a technical assistance center is, because often people are like, well, what do you guys do? What are you here for? We're really just to provide expert guidance, training and tools, best practices to help local communities, state community agencies implement federal programs more effectively. So if it's improving accessible transportation, aging services, or any other areas of public service. So I'll stop there.
Thank you. That was a lot of information, Melissa. So for audience members, I did copy the CCAM TAC website link in the chat.
Great. Thank you.
If you go to that link, they have a wealth of information. They have a tab called Resource Central, which includes federal funding opportunities, as well as a federal funding grading guide where you can use different funding opportunities in tandem to create transportation related resources. They also have a tab on training where they offer e-learning courses and webinars on community mobility and mobility management, as well as a list of grants and opportunities that local organizations could apply for, as well as local governments could apply for in order to improve transportation options. So thank you so much for sharing that resource.
Absolutely. And one thing I will add, so if you're looking at 5310, Section 5310 or Older Americans Act, this does give communities flexibility to tailor their services. So again, trying to tie back into the API community. So language accessible trip scheduling, partnering with cultural community centers to better serve AAPI older adults. Title VI in particular, they reinforce the responsibility. And I know Oscar mentioned that to ensure that transportation services are equitable, they're accessible to people regardless of their origin or their language. So just wanted to also tie that back into your community.
Great. Thank you. Also, we at ASIAN have developed a list of transportation related resources, and I am going to ask one of our team members to plug that list in the chat. I also invite other panelists and members in the audience to share any resources that you might be aware of in the chat, so we can all learn from one another. All right. Any questions from the audience so far, or any other comments from panelists?
This is Judy. Can I just add something to what Melissa said? She talked about mobility hubs, and we're seeing more and more of those hubs. And as she described, it's a way to aggregate transportation services for people to make it easier and more efficient to access services. One thing I'm seeing nationally is that those hubs are also including other services that people might need, such as light health service, vaccination services, employment services. So it's almost like a one-stop shop for people to not only access the transportation modes that they need, but also access community services. So I just wanted to add that to what Melissa said, because it's really an exciting opportunity for the field.
Thank you for adding that information, Judy. Melissa, when you were speaking earlier, you said that there was an example of a mobility hub in Colorado. Am I right? Did I capture that right?
Yes, and I might have a link to an article on that, and if I can find it, I'll drop it in the chat.
Wonderful, thank you.
Okay.
I can see an audience question. Catherine, you can go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question.
Hi, thank you so much. I really appreciate Melissa bringing up or tying things back to specific groups based on origin or language. And I'm curious for all panelists, and this question comes from a personal experience, what in what ways have you had to be creative in implementing more equitable language access, making transportation more relevant to different cultural groups based on country of origin or race or ethnicity? And my question comes from the personal example of the Transportation Authority where I live, attempting to introduce Spanish language for the announcements on the fixed route buses. And then when they did that, they messed up the timing. So blind folks like myself started missing our stops because they didn't time it correctly. And now the stop, we're we're hearing the announcement like after the fact. So clearly not like, well done in that case. And they, I'm sure they're working on doing things better. But in instance, I'm just providing that as an example. But in what ways have you seen people being creative about these types of things?
I could just offer something from my background. This is Judy Shanley. I'm an educator by background. I worked at the U.S. Department of Education, and in a classroom or in an instructional setting, we use the tenets of universal design for learning. And I'm sure those of you who are human services understand this, where you're presenting content in multiple ways to appeal to the learning styles that each individual has. You're also providing multiple ways for people to be engaged in that content so they learn. So in the transit sector, you might have audio signals, you might have visual signals, you might have support people, ambassador type people in the transit agency, transit facility to help with those connections. You may have education and training beforehand to the population, to the general public, so that people understand what's going on. But it's just the notion of there's not just one way to present content and to engage people. And so universal design for learning, I think of that as classroom based, but it happens in all of our society, right? In everything we do. So I'm thinking about that in relation to transit, and it works.
Hi, so this is Oscar here. So one of the main items that I was brought on both at the Great Lakes ADA Center as well as the National ADA National Network is to provide information on the ADA in Spanish. So I've been going around letting people know what their civil rights are. And one of the things that I heavily implement when I am providing this kind of information to individuals, not just on transportation, but everywhere else where the ADA applies, is incorporating storytelling, so both personal experiences as well as in the, everything that we see in our community. It was mentioned earlier that 78% of our seniors use family, friends, and neighbors. And so when we're looking at it from a cultural landscape of, at least for Latinos, we live with our parents, we live with our seniors, so we are the ones that are providing these kind of transportation. So educating the family members, the neighbors that, these are the rights that individuals have, so that you can advocate and they can in turn get better healthcare services, better socialization. These are things that we have to take into consideration when we're discussing why this is a benefit for them, why this is important for them to access it. But overall, it's just incorporating storytelling and your own culture to be able to provide said information to individuals in our community.
That was a great question, Catherine. Thank you for asking, and thanks to our panelists for responding to it. A reminder for the audience that the transportation resource guide that our team and ASIAN has developed has been now copied in the chat. A few other links have also been shared in the chat. And I see one question from Elma Johnson, and this one is directed at Melissa. Melissa, could you please give some more examples of how transportation has been integrated with housing and other co-location, linguistically appropriate communication and training? So some examples of how local policy and funding sources have been used to facilitate or encourage these integrated housing transport programs.
Yeah, I think the one I'll focus on is, I guess, this recent one in California, this new initiative that's recognizing housing and transportation and just kind of the critical link. So there is, and this was early I guess early October, this happened where they, just basically put, we're pouring billions of money into transit, but not, really finding the link and the connection with housing. So I don't have all of the. I can also drop that into the chat. I've got all my information in handy little links just in case I have these questions. But again, just so the bill was SB 79. I can't tell you that. But this bill sets standards to for allowable housing development within a half-mile of train stops and busted rapid transit, if they met that criteria. So that's one of the examples that I'll kind of pull out. But I mentioned several, and I don't really want to take the time up from many of the panelists that have questions to be asked of them. But if you want to, I'll drop my information in the chat, my email address, and I can certainly send you some more information about what we've collected as a center.
Great. Thank you, Melissa. I'm going to move along to my questions for Judy. Judy, what are some innovative transportation models that have been used to meet the community mobility needs of seniors?
Sure, thanks. Thanks for the question. And it's really exciting to be here. I recognize some of the names of attendees. Like, wow, we've been doing this work a really long time. I'm going to talk about innovation in terms of the characteristics or the attributes of innovative program as opposed to mentioning specific programs. And I think of three things when I think of those those attributes that characterize innovation. One is improved connections and engagement. And that means that there seems to be more and more connection and coordination between human services, aging offices and personnel, and transportation and transit providers. So that's really promising in our field, is that the transportation providers are more willing to be engaged in our organizations and our agencies that work with people with disabilities and older adults. The second attribute I've seen is increase in multimodal services. There's not just one transportation mode for every person, right? We need to have flexibility in the types of services that are provided, when they're offered. Things have been mentioned like volunteer driver programs, autonomous vehicles, shared ride services. All of those modes of transportation represent flexibility in the industry, and that's what we've seen over time in terms of innovation. And the third characteristic is increased public-private partnerships. Traditionally we thought that public transit agencies were the only provider of service, but now we're seeing an integration of some of these private services like shared ride providers like Uber and Lyft, as well as others, to create I always call it a continuum of accessible transportation service, so that everybody has a transportation mode that's aligned with their needs. And Jacqueline, you mentioned you used the phrase retire from driving. I retired from driving 27 years ago. I have not driven an automobile. I can drive an automobile, I think. My husband would tell you no, he doesn't want me behind the wheel. But I choose, I'm a choice non-driver. And so I've had to learn about how to be creative and tap into these continuums of accessible transportation to meet my own needs. So.
Thank you, Judy. Can you share examples of transportation and mobility programs that have been developed by Easter Seals?
Sure. Easter Seals at the national level doesn't provide direct transportation service. Our affiliates, we've got an affiliate network of 70 affiliates around the country, and many of them do offer transportation service. At the national office, what our role is really professional development, technical assistance, as Melissa had talked about, and training, where we're equipping the professionals that work in the industry with the skills, the competency that they need to better understand and build service for people with disabilities and older adults. And to that end, we've created national certifications and volunteer driving programs, mobility management, travel training. We offer a lot of travel training, train the trainer kind of instruction. We have a component of the Easter Seals Transportation Mobility Team that provides professional development in the form of webinars and other workshops and trainings. We do a lot of on the ground, customized kinds of training. So the programs that we develop at the national level are really responding to what the needs of the fields are. And it varies according to state and local region. So please, I'll put the URL to some of our training in the chat so people can see what we do.
Great. And these resources that you mentioned, Judy, the trainings, the webinars, are they free for the public to access? And how would people access them?
Currently we don't have federal programs. Like Melissa's affiliated with several federal programs that are free because they're funded by the federal government, the Federal Transit Administration, ACL. Easter Seals doesn't have federal programs anymore, so the services that we offer have nominal costs associated with them. A webinar might cost $25 to $50. A training that's a customized training on the ground might be more expensive, but it's a fee-for-service model we use.
And people will be able to access this information on the URL that you will share?
Definitely, definitely.
Great. That's great. And I know you're multitasking, trying to plug that information in the chat, but I do have another question for you. What are some lessons that you have learned from these innovations that you have tried at Easter Seals?
What I've learned really has been through my role as a 20-year technical assistance provider. Easter Seals has not necessarily implemented some of these programs, although what I'm going to talk about really does pertain to any one of us in any of our roles. I think it's important to engage the audiences that you're trying to serve, right? People with disabilities, older adults, workers, all along the process. And those individuals need to be true decision makers in the process. The other thing is always think about outcomes, always thinking about what impact will a transportation service or a program have for individuals with disabilities or older adults. I think thinking about the outcomes and the return on investment for investing in transportation is always a critical thing. And it's an important learning as we all develop programs and services.
Thanks so much, Judy. I think something you brought up that is really important is, just listening to seniors and people with disabilities to better understand their needs. I think that is so critical. I don't know if we have anybody in the audience from the Illinois Department on Aging, but the state of Illinois is currently working on a multi-sector plan on aging. And in order to inform that process, they are conducting listening sessions and are inviting members of the community to participate in those sessions. So for those of you in the audience, this is your opportunity to have your voices heard on myriads of issues, including transportation. So I'm going to plug a link into the chat about their listening session schedule. All right, well, I do have one more question for our panelists, and this is for all of you, and you can take turns to answer. What do you think can be done at local, state, and federal levels to better meet the transportation needs of seniors?
I can start. I would say at the federal level, and I've mentioned CCAM TAC already, but they are doing some really important work on, I think one of the biggest challenges that a lot of providers face, and that's coordinating trips, excuse me, funded by multiple programs. And so I think someone dropped the CCAM TAC website into the chat, but you can also refer back there in early 2026 next year, they have a cost allocation toolkit that will be released. That would help. That's going to help agencies put multiple riders in the same vehicles while still being able to bill per rider across different funding sources. So I really do believe that's a huge step towards really a more efficient, coordinated service delivery model. I also think that we should look into investing in technology solutions like APIs or application programming interfaces that allow providers to coordinate seamlessly so that riders only have to book once, pay once, even if their trip involves multiple providers. And at the state and local levels, just addressing complexity of different credentialing and compliance requirements across federal programs. So, when you see when one program requires its own driver training, its own safety reporting standards, it can really drive up costs and limit efficiency. So developing these common standards across programs, I think could simplify some operations and free up resources to serve more people. Again, just kind of tying in back to the API community, I think at every level, better data that reflects the diversity. Judy talked about making sure you're including, and then the question from Katie as well, including diverse voices. So you want data that's going to reflect the diversity within the aging population in the community, because the needs of Vietnamese elders in Houston might be different from Pacific Islanders in Honolulu or Koreans and elders in Los Angeles. So federal agencies can really help by promoting disaggregated data collection and really supporting these informed outreach from a cultural standpoint. So yeah, we could, you can partner with trusted API community organizations to really co-design these mobility solutions that feel safe and feel familiar to the folks that you're serving.
Thank you, Melissa, for your comments.
One thing that I've been thinking about as I've been doing this work is the notion of accountability. Under 5310, the section of the federal legislation that supports transportation, regional entities are required to do something called coordinated public transit plan, human services coordinated transportation plan, HSTP. Some jurisdictions call them something different, but those plans the intent of those plans are intended to engage all of those human service organizations and the transportation providers, anyone that has anything to do with transportation service for people with disabilities and older adults in the community. And they get together and they do needs assessment and they collect a lot of data, which I totally agree with Melissa is so critical to this. They collect data, they offer strategies for how they're going to address the transportation needs of these populations. Often those plans sit on a shelf and the public is not engaged in the plans. The people developing the plans aren't engaged in the plans, and it's such rich data. And so I think if there was more accountability at all levels, at the state level, federal level, and local level regarding these human service transportation coordinated plans, then we'd be farther along in identifying transportation gaps and implementing strategies to address those gaps. I'm going to put a URL in the chat from FTA that describes more about these human service transportation coordinated plans. It's a mouthful.
Thank you, Judy.
I think I would just add, focusing on those personal and sort of emotional experiences that people with disabilities and folks who are aging may experience. So thinking about training drivers on disability etiquette or other sort of considerations when it comes to the human interaction with some of the accessibility features on our vehicles and in our communities. Thinking about the consistent deployment and maintenance and the importance of these accessibility features. And also the role that other riders, drivers, operators may have in increasing or promoting safety for folks while they're traveling.
Thanks, Jacqueline.
All right. So this is Oscar here. So civil rights are for everyone, regardless of your age, gender, sex, disability. So the ADA is here to protect the civil rights of individuals with disabilities. And so one of the things, of course, is just to hold individuals accountable. State and local government services, they are required to have an ADA coordinator. So if there is something that's going wrong with, the buses announcements, you can file a complaint to the ADA coordinator to try to facilitate that. And so the more complaints that come in, the more items that come in for these entities, they're more aware of where the needs are, especially for compliance reasons. So if a service is inaccessible, if there's discrimination on the basis of disability, because the bus driver may not be trained on how to properly provide services to an individual with disability. So these are things that should be that individuals should know, not only about their rights, but where to go to. So that the more cases there are, the more the government sees at the state, local levels. For example, here in Chicago, courts mandated Chicago to provide audible pedestrian signals at crosswalks. So they started installing more of those here in Chicago. So individuals can, safely cross streets when they have visual disabilities. So hold them accountable.
Thank you for that reminder, Oscar. And thank
Can
you
I just
for sharing that link, Judy. Go ahead.
Yeah. Oh, I just wanted to add in the chat, and this is kind of based on what Jacqueline was saying or Jackie was saying in terms of, you know, uh, just hearing and listening to the concerns of older adult riders and riders who with disabilities and just this kind of kindness and courtesy. I came across an article in Connecticut. They've launched some courtesy public transit campaign. I'm going to put the link in the chat. But it seemed pretty interesting on how they're trying to really develop this fostering kindness and respect and courtesy across kind of all bus services. So definitely want to put that in the chat. It's just Jackie reminded me of that.
Thank you, Melissa. And for the audience, we are going to collate all the links and the resources that are being shared in the chat, and we will send them to you in an email after the webinar. At this point, out of all my questions, I'm going to open it up to the audience to see if you guys have any questions.
Mancha, while we're waiting, I just thought of a program that I knew about, and I don't know if it's still in existence, but the tenets of it are so important. It was a program for new immigrants on the West Coast. I think it was in California. And it was a mentoring program between Asian individuals who were part of the community, lived in the community, used the public transit system, and they paired those individuals with new citizens, with new residents of the community, as a way to help the new residents feel more comfortable and acclimated and integrated into the community. And so it not only taught them about how to use the public transportation system, but it also developed friendships, and it was a mentoring program, and it was such a neat idea, I thought, and very successful. I'll see if I could dig that up and I'll share it with you.
That would be helpful, Judy. That sounds like a really great model. All right, questions from the audience, and you can raise your hand or you can type your question in the chat. Panelists are also allowed to ask each other questions.
I said that you all have already done the hard work. I don't want to put you more on the spot.
Yeah. Jacqueline, I have a question for you. You know, it's not too common to see occupational therapists involved in this work. Maybe in relation to driving assessments and that kind of thing. But how can we engage occupational therapists at our local levels?
That's a great question, and something that I am challenged with frequently. You know, I got into transportation research working in an outpatient clinic where I had a bus stop right outside my front door at the clinic, and every single one of my patients was struggling to get to therapy on time or struggling at all. They were doing things like calling the fire department to help shovel their sidewalk to get them to therapy, right? These are folks that have a newly acquired disability, unexpected. They don't know what to do. And so this is what piqued my interest. And I think that OTs, um, we do focus on driving. We focus on driving retirement. We focus on driving assessment. And it's interesting because in the field, we struggle with things like liability. If I'm an OT and I'm working in the community, or in a clinic, in an outpatient clinic, and I want to enter the community, there's a certain level of risk that you're assuming. And so I think that it's a very complicated relationship between our cultural priorities here in the US that emphasize driving, that autonomy with driving. And we've really, I think, in rehab done a disservice to the other modes of transportation. We focus on walking and we focus on driving. And in my opinion, there's just as much value to powered mobility, to assistive devices, to accessible transportation as there is to those other more prioritized um, uh, opportunities. So I'm trying to change that. I am networking all the time with other rehab professionals. I'm working with other folks who do disability research. And everybody wants to talk about transportation, but nobody feels like they know what to do. They don't know what the solutions are. I think that OTs really feel like they're isolated as individuals providing services, but trying to care about some of these things. So I encourage OTs to be part of their disability communities, to think about transportation. But from the other direction, I haven't thought so much about it. How do transportation professionals engage those OTs? I have a feeling that they would love to be engaged. They just don't know where to start. So that might be something for us to talk more about, Judy.
Thank you for that question, Judy. And Jacqueline is certainly a trendsetter in the
Yeah.
field, right? But I am also an OT, so I'm really glad to see the work that Jacqueline is doing. Another thing that I think OTs can offer is, we are trained to identify functional skills and functional deficits in people as they get older. And OT can provide a lot of insight about, what transportation options match a person's functional skills.
Mhm.
And I copied a link in the chat from the American Occupational Therapy Association. That's actually a checklist that OTs can use to help their clients identify when it might be time to retire from driving, what community mobility options might be the safest and best matched to their functional skills. But certainly, I see future collaborations between OTs and transportation professionals, and I think Jacqueline can make it happen.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, even
Yeah, just
participating in those human service transportation coordinated planning that goes on
Right.
at the local level. I mean, that's an
Absolutely.
opportunity for transportation professionals to learn about the advantages of having OTs and PTs at the table.
yeah, absolutely. I will just say, I know NHTSA, I'm not sure, last time I checked, their website was down, but they focus a lot on older driver safety. And so, when we were a part of the NADTC, both Judy and I, we did a lot of work around, older driver safety. And we actually look to try to resurface that work around the work with AOTA and so I think there's definitely synergy there. We've done websites with folks at AOTA and so and just driver rehabilitation, because folks are still driving, but I don't know if it was you, Jacqueline, that mentioned earlier on the webinar about just people just learning how to use the mechanics on their own vehicles, these new features. We're talking about AVs, but can we first teach an older adult or a person with this disability to use the current features on their vehicle, first, before putting them in a car that's self-driving?
Yeah. I rented a car years ago and I didn't know how to turn it on because I had not been in a car. I had to go back to the rental counter and ask them, and it was a push button. It was like a push button. I'm using a key. I'm used to using a key. So yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much for all your comments and for such an engaging conversation. Before everyone leaves, we do have a feedback poll, and I'm going to ask Maya to launch the poll. This is going to be really helpful information for us as we start planning future webinars and future conversations on this topic to push the needle forward. Uh, and there we go. There's the poll. So before you exit, please complete this poll. And thank you so much again for joining today.
Thank you so much, everybody. Great seeing you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you
Good
for
seeing
having us.
everybody. See you.
Jacqueline, where are you based?
I'm at Shirley Ryan Ability Lab.
Okay.
Yeah, so my PhD is in DHD.
Got it.
Yeah, yeah,
Well,
yeah,
good to see the DHD department out there.
yeah, yeah.
Yes, yes, definitely lots of UIC representation here,
Mhm.
which is great to see.
I had a
Yeah.
quick question. Can you hear me? This is Maya.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, I had a quick question. I didn't want to take up time from the panel or from the audience, but just living in New York now, they're expiring the MTA, the Metro cards, and going contactless with public transport here at the end of the year. And there are a
Oh,
lot of older adults who live in my neighborhood and just not having a lot of, I mean, I work in aging services now, but I was just wondering what suggestions you might have to support this transition for just neighbors.
I think that's a tough one. I mean, I think I'm hearing things happening in other uh in for example rideshare where in some cases instead of teaching older adults or people with disabilities how to use the Lyft apps, some practices and organizations are actually going the other direction where they're having a call center. They're going back to like a call center type model to help support ordering those trips for folks who may be struggling with technology. Um, I think there's two issues. One is the affordability, the affordability of a smartphone, right? The contactless piece of it is sort of implies that you have this way to pay. Unless can you tap a credit card or something like that? Do you know?
Yeah, yeah, you can
think so
tap
if
a
you
credit
can.
card.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Um, so it will be interesting to sort of see as far as supporting your neighbors. Um, First, it's quite considerate that you're thinking of them and that you want to support them. And I think just having those basic conversations of how's it going? Like, is there anything I can help you with? That I'm sure you're already doing. But as far as educating like more broadly in your neighborhood, um, indeed, it's a tough transition, right? You show up one day to the train and you can't pay the way you used to, and you need coaching. So I think holding the MT accountable to providing support in that transition in person at those stations would probably be important.
Mhm. Okay, yeah, thank you. That's helpful.
Yeah. And just awareness. I think a lot of times seniors aren't aware of these types of changes, and then they're caught unawares where they want to go somewhere and they realize suddenly that the system has changed. So maybe, a neighborhood awareness campaign even,
Hmm.
flyers may be posted in buildings that explain what this transition is about and what people can expect.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Thanks for asking that question, Maya.
Yeah,
Yeah.
really unique circumstance there, and definitely an opportunity for inaccessible uh, environments.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it came to mind because I mean, just some family visit the past weekend and they're not older adults. They're in their 50s, but they still had trouble figuring out how to pay. And I was telling them you can tap your credit card, but I can't imagine being, somebody who requires accessible stations, who knows their train routes to do their normal day-to-day things, having to pivot.
Yeah, and that's where the legal part comes in, where there have, if because it is the MTA is a state or city transportation hub, they have to be able to provide reasonable modifications to policies, practices, or procedures, which means that there have to be alternate formats of, how individuals that are not able to utilize contactless payments, especially because they may have a limb disability. So, how are they moving their phone to tap those kind of things? So these are just certain considerations that need to be taken when designing these kind of things and implementing these kind of policies. And so, of course, ADA coordinator, that's where I would go and voice those concerns for individuals with disabilities.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. This has been a great conversation. Thanks for audience that has actually stayed for these extra few minutes. It was lovely having all of you join. Thank you, Oscar and Jacqueline. We really appreciate you being here.
Yeah,
Take care,
thank you so
everyone.
much for the invitation, Mancha.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, thank you
Yeah,
too. All right, have a good one,
absolutely.
everyone.
Yes, everyone, enjoy the rest of your afternoon. Bye.
All right. Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and end the meeting. And then Phoebe, yes, the poll results will be saved. But yeah, if anybody else has any other questions, feel free to reach out to us.
Great, thank you so much.